Darnell Foster was an artist whose soul bled into his work. His modest studio was cluttered with half-finished canvases, each one telling a different story, stories of race, identity, and resilience that Darnell had lived, seen, and fought against. His art was not just a hobby, it was his way of confronting the world that often refused to acknowledge the struggles of Black people. The themes of his paintings were deeply personal, yet universally understood. He depicted the harsh realities of racial injustice, the quiet pride of his community, and the hope for change that sustained him through life's toughest battles. Yet, despite his raw talent, Darnell's work remained unrecognized by the mainstream art world. His emotional, thought-provoking art was often dismissed by galleries and curators who found it too raw and unrefined. In an art world dominated by elitism and tradition, Darnell's work was seen as too challenging, too bold for those who preferred more refined and polished pieces. This rejection did nothing to dampen his resolve; if anything, it made him more determined. He would continue to pour his soul into his paintings, knowing that his voice, though ignored by many, was a necessary one in an art world that desperately needed change. Darnell knew that his work, though emotionally compelling, didn't fit the status quo. He was fully aware that the very nature of his art, rooted in cultural and social commentary, was often uncomfortable for those who had the power to decide what was worth showcasing. But that never stopped him. His art wasn't for the approval of the high society clients who frequented the major galleries. It was for the people, the community, the unheard voices. It was a testament to the beauty of Black life and the unspoken struggles that accompanied it. Introduction to Jonathan Caldwell, the gallery owner. Jonathan Caldwell was the proud owner of Caldwell Gallery, a highly regarded institution in the world of art. His gallery was known for showcasing the most elite, refined works, a reflection of his own elitist beliefs. Jonathan curated exhibitions that catered to the wealthy elite, a class of individuals who valued tradition, polish, and sophistication above all else. His clients were influential, from high society families to corporate moguls, and they expected nothing less than perfection. For Jonathan, art was not merely an expression of emotion, it was an investment, an asset to be curated and displayed, a status symbol to elevate his gallery's reputation. Jonathan had no interest in unconventional art, particularly for marginalized communities. He dismissed works that challenged the norms and preferred those that conformed to his vision of what art should be. He prided himself on showcasing the established and refined, often rejecting any work that carried social or political weight. In Jonathan's world, art that reflected the struggles of Black identity or challenged the status quo was unwelcome, deemed unrefined and too controversial. Jonathan's gallery was a place of exclusivity. He believed that only artists with prestigious credentials, formal education, and a polished style deserved space in his gallery. He was blind to the changing art world that was beginning to embrace diversity, authenticity, and art that carried a message beyond the canvas. Jonathan's view of the art world was antiquated, but it was one that worked well for him in the world he inhabited, a world that operated on exclusivity and privilege. Darnell's first encounter with Jonathan Caldwell. Eager to break into the art world and gain recognition for his work, Darnell decided to approach Caldwell Gallery. Armed with his portfolio, Darnell carefully selected the pieces that he believed would make the greatest impact, works that spoke to the beauty and complexity of Black identity, to the challenges faced by his community, and to the resilience that kept people going despite the hardships. Jonathan Caldwell, upon receiving Darnell's request for a meeting, agreed to take a look at the portfolio. As Darnell entered the sleek, polished gallery, his heart raced. The walls were filled with works that exuded sophistication, works that were undeniably beautiful, but often lacked the depth Darnell's paintings carried. As Jonathan walked through the gallery, he glanced at Darnell's portfolio with a somewhat uninterested look. He quickly flipped through the pages, each one showing a piece of Darnell's soul, each one a narrative of struggle, history, and strength. Jonathan's expression never changed. "This is too raw," he said with a dismissive wave. "It's unrefined, too rough around the edges for the caliber of work we represent here at the gallery." He paused and shook his head, as if to reassure himself that he was making the right decision. "It doesn't fit the standards of sophistication that we uphold here," he added, placing the portfolio down with barely a glance. Darnell stood there, stunned. The sting of Jonathan's words hit him hard, but beneath it, a fire began to burn brighter. He had been dismissed yet again, his work rejected by the very gatekeepers of the art world. But this time, instead of leaving dejected, he felt something else, determination. He wasn't going to let Jonathan's words define him. He would prove to Jonathan, and to the art world, that his work had value, that his voice was one that deserved to be heard. "I understand," Darnell said, keeping his voice steady, though his heart was pounding. He collected his portfolio and turned to leave. "But I will show you that my work is important, whether you see it now or not." As Darnell walked out of the gallery, a sense of determination settled in his chest. He would continue on his path, no matter how many doors were slammed in his face. This was just the beginning of his journey. Jonathan may not have seen the value in his work, but the world would. Darnell's art, and his voice, would be heard. After being rejected by Jonathan Caldwell's prestigious gallery, Darnell Foster decided to turn his focus elsewhere, away from the elitist circles that had turned him away. He sought out smaller, progressive art communities that were beginning to appreciate art for its deeper cultural relevance and emotional resonance. These underground circles were more in tune with the changing art world, and they saw something in Darnell's work that the traditional galleries had missed: the power of social commentary and activism embedded in his paintings. Darnell's art, which explored themes of race, identity, and the shared experiences of marginalized communities, quickly found a place in these spaces. It wasn't just art to be admired, it was a voice for the voiceless. His work didn't just depict scenes or tell stories, it conveyed powerful messages about the struggles, resilience, and hope of Black communities. Collectors and curators who were searching for art that spoke to contemporary social issues began to take notice. Darnell's paintings were displayed in independent galleries that championed new and diverse voices, and his work was bought by private collectors who saw it as more than just a financial investment. It was art that could create change, raise awareness, and challenge the status quo. The loyal following that Darnell had built in these circles became a testament to the impact of his work, and he began to understand the powerful connection between art and activism. Though still largely unknown in the mainstream art world, Darnell's place in these underground art circles became a beacon for the future of art. He had found a community that embraced him, and in turn, his work began to resonate beyond the confines of galleries that catered to only the most polished, traditional art. Darnell's breakthrough, auction success. Darnell's moment of breakthrough came when one of his key pieces, The Unseen Story, was acquired by a prestigious auction house. The painting, which masterfully depicted the resilience and beauty of African American culture while confronting the pain of systemic oppression, was seen as a powerful statement within the art world. The auction house, known for dealing in high-end, rare art, expected the piece to sell well, but no one anticipated just how far beyond expectations the sale would go. The bidding for The Unseen Story escalated quickly, reaching a record-breaking price. The art world stood in shock as Darnell's work, once rejected and dismissed, became a highly sought-after commodity. The sale attracted the attention of major collectors, critics, and art institutions, marking Darnell as an artist to watch in the coming years. The financial success was a major turning point for Darnell. The recognition and money that came with the auction sale allowed him to further his career and reach a broader audience. But despite the success, Darnell remained grounded. He knew that his work wasn't about money or fame, it was about making a statement, pushing cultural boundaries, and challenging societal norms. His passion for art as a form of activism never waned, and he continued to use his paintings as a vehicle to tell stories that had long been ignored in mainstream art. Darnell's success signaled a shift in the art world, one where art was no longer solely for the elite or the well-established. It was for everyone. It was a space for diverse voices, for radical change, and for questioning the status quo. Gallery owners continued dismissal. Meanwhile, Jonathan Caldwell continued to dismiss Darnell's rise, believing it was a fleeting fad that would soon pass. He was oblivious to the changing tides in the art world and, rather than acknowledging the power of Darnell's work, he mocked it in private. Jonathan's comments about Darnell's success being overhyped and just a trend were reflective of his refusal to adapt to the changing nature of the art industry. He believed that the success Darnell was experiencing was temporary and that his work would soon be forgotten. But Darnell's success only grew. His paintings continued to sell for higher prices, and more critics began to praise his ability to blend contemporary techniques with a message that resonated with the world. Darnell's name was mentioned alongside other groundbreaking artists who had used their work to challenge social and political issues. The traditional art world, once so secure in its beliefs, was now beginning to feel the shift. One evening, while attending an industry event, Darnell overheard Jonathan Caldwell mocking his success to a group of industry professionals. "It's just a phase," Jonathan said. "His art is raw and unpolished. It won't last. Just wait. The market will move on." The sting of Jonathan's words was sharp, but rather than feeling defeated, Darnell felt an even stronger sense of purpose. He knew that Jonathan didn't understand the depth or power of his work, but that didn't matter anymore. Darnell's success wasn't about proving anyone wrong, it was about showing that his art had a place in the world, a place where it could make an impact. Darnell's rise was real, and the art world was beginning to take notice. The rejection he had once faced from Jonathan's gallery only made this moment sweeter. Now, with each new sale and exhibition, Darnell was proving that his work was not just a trend, it was the future of art. As Darnell Foster's reputation continued to build, his art became a beacon of cultural significance in the contemporary world. His success snowballed, leading to major exhibitions at renowned museums and prestigious galleries around the world. From New York's Museum of Modern Art to London's Tate Modern, Darnell's work was now being showcased on the biggest stages. His once raw and unrefined pieces had evolved into a form of artistic leadership, capturing the attention of people who saw in his work not only beauty but depth, history, and social commentary. The emotional resonance of Darnell's paintings was undeniable. Critics hailed his ability to blend contemporary techniques with powerful cultural storytelling. His pieces, which often depicted the struggles of Black communities, now stood as symbols of resistance and resilience. The way he portrayed his subjects, with raw and emotive brushstrokes, connected deeply with audiences around the world. His paintings commanded millions at auction, and Darnell quickly became one of the most sought-after artists in the market. Galleries that had once rejected him now clamored to represent him. Major collectors, who had previously overlooked him, were now fighting to add his work to their collections. Darnell was no longer just an artist, he had become a cultural leader, shaping the future of contemporary art. He was part of a new wave of creators pushing the boundaries of what art could be and what it could say about the world. His name was now mentioned alongside iconic figures in art history. Darnell's work wasn't just a commodity, it was a movement. Through his art, he was making a statement about the world's most pressing issues: race, identity, and the fight for equality. His influence reached far beyond galleries and museums. It was shaping conversations in politics, social justice, and the broader cultural landscape. Jonathan Caldwell's realization. Jonathan Caldwell, still struggling to maintain the relevance of his once dominant gallery, began to see the growing buzz around Darnell's work. At first, it was hard to ignore the rising prices at auction, where Darnell's paintings were fetching astronomical sums. Jonathan, who had dismissed Darnell's art as a passing trend, was forced to confront the reality that Darnell was not just another fleeting sensation in the art world. He was a force to be reckoned with. As Jonathan's gallery faced financial difficulties and his client base began to turn their attention elsewhere, he realized the scale of his mistake. Darnell's name was on the tip of every art critic's tongue. The major museums and galleries that had once been inaccessible to Darnell were now fighting to showcase his work, while Jonathan's gallery, clinging to its traditionalist roots, struggled to attract attention. The deeper Jonathan looked into Darnell's success, the more he felt regret for having dismissed him so quickly. He now saw the value in Darnell's work, not just financially, but in terms of its cultural importance. Jonathan realized that he had missed out on the chance to represent an extraordinary artist at the start of his career. His own gallery, founded on exclusivity and elitism, seemed to be a relic of a past that no longer resonated with the current art world. Watching Darnell's success outpace his own, Jonathan's pride began to crack. He had spent years building a reputation for himself, but now it was all crumbling as Darnell became the voice of a new generation of artists. Jonathan was left behind, unable to adapt to the rapidly changing art scene. Darnell's new identity. With his newfound success and influence, Darnell took full control of his career. No longer relying on traditional galleries or the old guard of the art world, he bypassed the established systems that had long excluded him. He negotiated directly with top collectors, curators, and museums, ensuring that his voice and vision were at the forefront of his artistic endeavors. Darnell's rise wasn't just about fame or wealth, it was about reshaping the art world and ensuring that it reflected the diversity of voices and experiences in society. He understood that with his success came the power to create real change. As he cemented his place as one of the leading figures in contemporary art, Darnell used his platform to elevate other emerging artists from marginalized communities, offering mentorship and creating opportunities that were once denied to him. Darnell became a mentor, giving back to the community that had supported him and offering guidance to those who had faced the same obstacles he once did. Through his mentorship programs, young artists were given access to resources, galleries, and exhibitions, ensuring that their voices would be heard in the art world. Darnell's efforts not only changed his own life but paved the way for future generations of artists who would no longer be marginalized for their background, their style, or their story. His rise to prominence was not just a personal victory, it was a victory for the art world itself, a victory for the artists who had been ignored or overlooked for too long. Darnell was no longer just a black artist creating art for a niche market, he was a cultural leader, a symbol of what could be achieved when art transcended the boundaries imposed by tradition. He had broken the mold, and in doing so, he had changed the face of contemporary art. Having achieved significant financial success and grown his influence in the art world, Darnell Foster was in a position of power. However, his mission was not yet complete. Darnell knew that in order to fully transform the art world and ensure that diverse voices were heard, he needed to change the institutions that had long shut them out. The first institution on his radar was Caldwell Gallery, the very gallery that had rejected him years ago. With his newfound wealth, Darnell began quietly purchasing shares in Caldwell Gallery. He didn't rush in to take control, but rather made strategic moves, buying up shares over time, slowly gaining influence within the institution. As the gallery continued to face mounting financial troubles due to its inability to adapt to the evolving art world, Darnell's role within the gallery grew stronger. His increasing stake gave him more leverage, and he began working behind the scenes to restructure the gallery's operations. Darnell wasn't interested in simply taking over for the sake of control. He had a clear vision for the gallery's future, one that embraced the voices of emerging artists, especially those from marginalized communities. He began pushing for changes that would diversify the gallery's exhibitions, focusing on new, dynamic artists who brought fresh perspectives to the table. The art world was changing, and Darnell was determined to make sure Caldwell Gallery was a part of that change. He also started advocating for greater inclusion in the selection process. Darnell pushed for a more progressive, inclusive approach to curating, prioritizing artists whose work spoke to the times, those who reflected the stories of underserved communities, and those whose art challenged societal norms. By shifting the gallery's focus toward diversity, Darnell was not just taking control of an institution, he was helping to reshape the future of the art world itself. Jonathan Caldwell's downfall. As Darnell's influence continued to grow within Caldwell Gallery, Jonathan Caldwell found himself at a crossroads. His refusal to embrace the changes that were sweeping the art world led to the continued decline of the gallery. Jonathan's traditionalist model, which had once attracted high-profile clients and collectors, became increasingly irrelevant. Darnell, now a major stakeholder in the gallery, was pushing for reform, and Jonathan was powerless to stop it. Darnell's meteoric rise in the art world only amplified the struggles of Jonathan's gallery. While Darnell's exhibitions filled galleries worldwide and his art was featured in major museums, Caldwell Gallery was barely able to maintain its footing in the industry. The financial struggles grew worse, and Jonathan watched helplessly as the gallery he had spent years building became a shadow of its former self. Darnell's success continued to outpace Jonathan's, and the gap between them grew wider. Jonathan, once the gatekeeper of the elite art world, now found himself irrelevant. The art world had evolved, and his refusal to adapt had cost him everything. Darnell had emerged as the new leader of the art world, and Jonathan was left behind. His once thriving business was slipping through his fingers, and he realized that he had lost control of the very institution he had founded. The final confrontation. The moment of reckoning arrived when Darnell, having quietly gained control of Caldwell Gallery, confronted Jonathan Caldwell. He walked into Jonathan's office, his presence commanding, and revealed that he now held a majority stake in the gallery. Jonathan, stunned by the revelation, had no choice but to acknowledge the change that had come. "I'm in charge now," Darnell said calmly. "The gallery you built, your vision, it's not enough anymore. The art world has changed, Jonathan. And now, I'm going to make sure this gallery reflects that change." Jonathan, his face a mixture of disbelief and regret, tried to muster a response, but Darnell didn't give him the opportunity. Darnell explained that his success was never about seeking Jonathan's approval or validation. "I didn't need you to recognize my worth," Darnell continued. "I was never after your validation. My mission was always about changing the art world on my own terms, and that's what I've done." Jonathan, humbled by the turn of events, expressed his regret. "I was wrong about you, Darnell. I didn't see it then, but I see it now. You've become what I failed to understand. I'm sorry for dismissing your work and underestimating your potential." Darnell stood tall, his resolve unwavering. "This was never personal, Jonathan. You didn't just dismiss me, you dismissed an entire generation of artists, and the art world paid the price for it. But now, things are changing. And you can either be part of that change or stay stuck in the past." Despite his regret, Jonathan realized that Darnell had already won. He had become a force in the art world, and Jonathan's time had passed. Darnell offered Jonathan a role in the new gallery structure, but it was clear that Darnell's influence had now eclipsed Jonathan's. Jonathan's days of control were over, and the future belonged to Darnell. Jonathan, defeated but aware of the inevitability of change, accepted his role in the new gallery. But he knew, deep down, that Caldwell Gallery would never be the same. Darnell's vision would now shape its future, and the gallery would reflect the inclusive, diverse art world Darnell had fought so hard to create. Under Darnell Foster's visionary leadership, Caldwell Gallery underwent a profound transformation. Once a space of exclusivity and elitism, it blossomed into a thriving hub for emerging artists from diverse backgrounds, a platform where creativity, culture, and social dialogue were celebrated. Darnell ensured that the gallery reflected the new era of art, an era that embraced authenticity, diversity, and stories that had long been excluded from mainstream institutions. The gallery became a pioneering force, fostering creativity that was as varied as the artists it now represented. Emerging artists, particularly those from marginalized communities, now had a place to showcase their work. These artists, who had previously struggled to gain visibility, found their voices amplified under Darnell's leadership. His vision turned Caldwell Gallery into more than just an art space, it became a cultural epicenter for the revolutionary art that was changing the world. Darnell also instituted mentorship programs, providing young artists who were once overlooked by the traditional art world the resources and opportunities they needed to thrive. These programs were designed not just to showcase art, but to ensure that the next generation of artists had the tools to succeed. From access to funding to advice on navigating the art industry, Darnell's mentorship gave many young creators the chance to break into a world that had long been closed to them. The gallery became renowned for its progressive exhibitions that tackled contemporary issues such as racial inequality, gender identity, and global struggles, all while promoting the voices of artists who had something meaningful to say. It was no longer a place reserved for the privileged few. Caldwell Gallery became a space for inclusivity, change, and self-expression. Reflection on the journey. Standing in the heart of Caldwell Gallery, Darnell Foster took a moment to reflect on his incredible journey. He had come from a humble studio where he had fought for every opportunity, and now he was at the helm of a major institution that was changing the very fabric of the art world. His success, however, was never about personal achievement alone. It had always been about making space for others, about opening doors for the many artists who had been overlooked because of their background, their race, or their unconventional style. Darnell knew that his journey was a testament to resilience. It was about vision, seeing the art world not as it was, but as it could be. His story was proof that anyone, regardless of their background, could achieve greatness by staying true to their values and vision. The rejection he faced, the countless doors that were slammed in his face, had only made him stronger. And now, his success was helping to change the art world for the better. Through his work and leadership, Darnell had challenged the norms, broken barriers, and shown that art had the power to change society. His art was a reflection of the struggles and triumphs of Black communities, but it had universal resonance. Darnell's rise had proven that when art speaks to the heart of humanity, it transcends boundaries, transforms industries, and reshapes cultures. He had done that, and would continue to do so for generations to come. Darnell's lasting impact. Darnell's legacy extended far beyond the walls of Caldwell Gallery. While his art would be celebrated for years to come, it was the lasting changes he made in the art world that would define his true impact. His mentorship programs, which had elevated so many young artists, ensured that the next generation would have opportunities that he had been denied. Darnell had turned his own struggles into a source of power, and in doing so, he had opened the door for others to walk through. The gallery, under his leadership, became a beacon for change. It was not only a place to view art but a space that constantly asked critical questions about the world. His legacy as a leader and an advocate for diversity in the arts would be remembered for generations. Artists who had once struggled for recognition were now thriving in an environment where they could create freely, without fear of being judged based on their background, their race, or their gender. Darnell's story was a reminder to the world that art, like society, could be transformed when people challenged the status quo and fought for what they believed in. He had shown that art could be a tool for social justice, a way to break down barriers, and a platform to amplify the voices that needed to be heard most. And through his continued leadership and advocacy, Darnell would ensure that the art world would never again return to the days of exclusion and elitism that had once defined it. His work continued to inspire future generations of artists who would go on to break their own barriers, create their own paths, and change the world in their own ways. Darnell had done more than just reshape the art world. He had helped shape the future of a society that would no longer be content with silence, that would demand more from its artists and creators. Darnell Foster's story was a legacy of empowerment, transformation, and a commitment to making sure that art, like the world it reflects, always moved forward.